Just want to say good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to tutorial number 3, I think, for credit risk and credit as an asset class. Lots of interesting things to tell you. And I'd like to go through a number of topics today, including something that I wanted to talk about last time but didn't get a chance, which was the, what's that called? Extinguisher swap. And we'll take a look at that too, okay? There's more to it than you think. I want to, just hearing you guys talk about the, last night in your presentation, talking about the overnight index swap. I don't know how familiar you are with that product, but it is an important one. It's very interesting. So I will give you a bit more info on that. I want to talk a little bit about quant basics, which you will need in the coming weeks, and you will need to know that, certainly, if you want to become a fixed income professional. I think some of you might already know this, some of you don't, from your fixed income course. I want to talk a little bit about IRS, interest rate swaps, and credit default swaps. And following that, CDS and CLN, we already touched on that, and I'm going to try and tie everything up together so it all makes sense to you, okay? Now, first thing, so just by way of housekeeping, I've tidied up the schedule. So as you know, this one is Q2, and these are the venues. So today actually is the last day we are going to be in this room. So from next week onwards, you guys, can you please go to CYT 201? Which is actually just next door. There is one particular week where you have to go to 210. I don't think that is a typo. That is not a typing error. You really, anyway, everything is on the second floor. Just walk around and you'll see me, okay? Somewhere. For the this L here stands for lecture. So for the lectures, you know we meet in Admiralty every week, except, so this one, as you might know, this is a makeup lecture. The 20th of May is actually a Sunday. So we have 2 makeup classes. These will be 10 a.m. in the morning. So 10 a.m. for May 20 and May 27. You might want to put that in your calendar. I will send you an invitation anyway, closer to the date. But that will be in YIA LT5, just on the other side of the railway tracks. Yeah, okay. So I try to tidy it up. So this is the lecture venue, and then the tutorial 1 venue, which doesn't concern you, and tutorial 2 venues. All right. Now, I just thought I will start by just sharing with you some of my thoughts regarding interest rates, because credit is intimately related to interest rates, okay? And I want to make some observations, okay? And I don't think people would argue with a simple statement like that, which is the currency of a country, it tends to get stronger when the supply goes down. Well, it's not just currency, it's anything, okay? Anything, the price of anything would tend to go up when the supply goes down, when the demand is rising. Now, currency really is no exception, okay? But you can go further than that. And now, when is supply going down? Well, supply is going down, I guess, when the central bank starts to tighten what they call tighten monetary policy. Okay? So they try to slowly push up short-term interest rates. Effectively, what that really means is central bank. So let's say I'm the central bank. This is the central bank. You guys, you are the economy. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of liquidity in the economy. And slowly, bit by bit, I try to get it back into the system. Okay? So that's what central banks are doing. Now, does it mean demand going up? You take the US dollar, for example. The demand going up simply means more people need dollars. Well, there's not enough dollars to go around. Okay? And this can happen, for example, when a government, any government, is expanding its fiscal policies. This is not a class of macroeconomics. I'm just sharing with you what I understand. And I'll tell you why I shared it with you. Now, we know what fiscal policy means, right? So healthcare, education, build the roads, build the bridges, build the airports, and whatever, that's fiscal. And, but, when its tax revenue is decreasing, okay, one or the other. So you want to build more roads, more airports, more highways, and maybe at the same time your tax income is going down. How can your tax income go down? When you make tax cuts, you collect less taxes. Okay? Although there is an argument out there that when you start cutting taxes because of the stimulus effect on businesses, so it's actually overall it's good for the economy, and end up more people start businesses, and you end up collecting more tax revenue. That's a theory. Okay? I'm not going to go into that. Anyway. So that aside, so you, all things being equal, so you expand your fiscal policy, but your tax is going down. So you may run, your surplus will be smaller, or you may even run a deficit. Government is it's like a family. The economy is like a family. So you're not making a lot of money, or dad, or the son or the daughter, they're not making a lot of money, and then they start buying the fridge or the TV and the washing machine. Of course, you run a deficit. Right? Now, the reason I thought I'll tell you about this is that we seem to be in precisely this point now in our economic cycle. Right? So 1 year ago, I can't say this. But now I think we can't. We have all of these things lining up. Right? And normally, this is when when you should see the currency getting stronger. Okay, especially when the supply is going down or when monetary policy is getting tighter. But at the same time, they want to expand their fiscal policy coverage. And Trump has been saying that for a long time. I hope they do it. Okay? They need to rebuild a lot of the infrastructure. I don't know if any of you has been to New York. You know the airport in New York? It's called JFK, it's on the Kennedy Airport. It is terrible. It is falling apart, it really is. So they need to, and this is supposed to be the most advanced country in the world. It is crap. So they need to build the infrastructure, so they're saying they will, but at the same time they're going to cut taxes. Okay? So effectively the government is competing, it's called crowding out, with the rest of the economy for dollars. Does that make sense to you? Yeah? I'm just sharing this with you. Okay? Taking this this platform. Now, so I think the dollar will get stronger in the long run. Okay. In fact, it should already be stronger, and right now it is not. I mean, it's not down the toilet, but it is not as strong as people expect. And some of you actually have asked me why is that? Okay? I have to say honestly that caught me by surprise a few months ago. But I think some of it has to do with the market uncertainties that people have with the president that is in charge. I think that's part of it. Okay? But anyway, I switch to another topic now. Okay, so this one is done. I want to talk about something else. And this will be really useful for you. Okay? You know what OIS is? We talked about this last night, so obviously people who present it would have a good idea, right? But everybody else, you know what OIS is? Auntie, do you know? Yeah. Okay, good. Let's go back then, yeah. Okay, she's saying that it is a valid point. She is saying when you talk about currencies, it is actually relative to, let's say, dollar yen or dollar renminbi. So when currency is getting strong, it is getting stronger relative to something else. It is true. I agree with what you just said. I do think that in the case of the US dollar, okay, first of all, what you said is correct. Right? In the case of the US dollar, you can look at the US dollar bill. You can actually look at that almost as a commodity of its own, because it's needed not only within the US, it's needed all over the world. So what I am saying here is, if you look at the US dollar as a commodity, just as you would look at oil or soybeans. Okay? When you look at it in that context, okay? So when I say the US dollar is getting stronger, I really just mean generally there's more demand for it. Then I guess two things will happen. One is that interest rates will get higher, and it is already doing that. Okay? The other is your point. Okay, when you say it's getting, when the dollar is getting more in demand, so how does that manifest itself? Well, one way would be in the currency market. Okay? So relative to other currencies, then $1 will buy more yen, more RMB. $1 can buy more gold. Okay? Or $1, that is the price of gold will drop. Okay? Or $1 can buy more oil. Okay? That is the price of oil will drop. Or $1 buys more Swiss francs, and so on. So you're right, what you just said, okay? But it's part of the overall sort of heightened demand for dollars, either on its own or relative to some other currency. Am I making sense to you? Yeah, but your point is correct. You do. How do I say? All right. If you want to look at currency with regard to imports and exports, which I was not doing, okay? But if you do that, I think imports and exports, or the trade of a country, they do not influence an exchange rate. It's more like the other way around. Okay? It's more like the other way around. Which is to say, when the currency of the country is very expensive, okay, then it makes exporting more difficult, importing easier. Okay? So that I would agree with. But here, what I am doing is I'm trying to isolate a single simple macro observation, which is when is the currency of a country in demand, or when is it likely to get stronger, either versus other commodities or versus other currencies. These are the circumstances. We have these circumstances. For the case of the US, by the way, the US is overwhelmingly what we call a service-driven economy. So the way it functions is that there are a lot of services provided. So it's not really so much export-driven, which is why a lot of this tariff stuff really is bullshit to me. They really got the wrong priorities. China is different. So the US might be, 70% service driven. I don't know the exact breakout, but let's say 65, 35, 65 services, 35 exports. China is the other way around. China is overwhelmingly, or it was at least, it was mostly an export driven economy, and not much of it was services. But the Chinese policy makers, actually, they were very smart, and they saw that this was a weakness for China. So some years ago, they already tried to change that. They want to have, services and export more of a balance. They are doing that, and I think they've been quite successful. Anyway, that's just for your background. Now, I want to actually talk more about this. You want to know what? Okay, now. You want to know y-axis? So what does it stand for? That's just, you know. Okay, overnight index. Where does that overnight rate come from? Just somebody, some dude somewhere makes it up. What is that overnight rate? No. The Fed fund. So my next question is, do you understand what Fed fund is? Does anyone know what Fed funds are? The bank borrows money from the central bank. Frequently, this is the answer people give. I think in 10 people, maybe more than 5 people would think that Fed funds is the rate that banks borrow from the Fed. It is the rate at which banks borrow, but not actually from the Fed. This is actually all very interesting. I think if you go out there and if you interview for an analyst job or any kind of, market professional, somebody asks you, do you know what Fed funds are? And you don't know, I think, your prospects may not be that good. Whoops. The PowerPoint's been doing that to me this morning. Now, so first of all, with a simple IRS, okay? So there are two parties. So let's say for 10 years, so A pays B a fixed rate, and B pays A LIBOR 3 month. Now that's a very, very simple classic for 10 years interest rate swap. And in the end, so there will be 40 quarters. You got to ask yourself, actually, what is LIBOR? Okay, now LIBOR stands for London Interbank Offered Rate. Interbank Offered Rate. It is actually the rate at which banks, or at least the high quality banks, will lend to each other for 3 months. Okay? Now, so LIBOR is basically, it's regarding interbank credit risk. It's an interbank credit risk benchmark. Now, interbank is very important because the banking system is what drives the economy. Okay? So there are huge sums of money going around in the interbank market, and LIBOR is the key representation of that. Now, so this is 3-month LIBOR, and then somebody came up with the idea, well, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be 3 months. It can be 1 month. It can be 1 week. In fact, it can be 1 day. How about that? And then they came up with this idea of the overnight index swap. Okay, so this one is still the same, but the rate that you pay on the other side is the overnight rate. In fact, it's close to the the Fed fund. Now there may be a spread to it. It depends on how you price it, but it's Fed funds driven. Okay. Yeah. Give yourself uh, now the Fed funds actually is quite interesting. I want to share this with you because I don't know when once you leave this place, other people will bother to tell you. uh, what is the Fed funds? Well, first of all, it is, so I said the LIBOR is an interbank borrowing rate between banks, and the Fed funds also is that. Okay, the Fed funds is not. It is not the rate that the Fed will lend money to banks. Okay? Now, so what is Fed funds? In order to understand that, you have to know. Do you know what this is? Reserve requirements. You know what this is? Now, you know how when a bank, so this is a bank balance sheet. Now, we talk a lot about Basel 1, 2, 3, 4, and Basel and all the capital adequacy ratios mostly are to do with the bottom left-hand corner of the balance sheet, okay, which is how much capital do you have, what kind of capital is it tier 1 or tier 2, and so on. So when you talk about, and then do you have any hybrid capital, okay? So Basel capital requirements are mostly focused on this part of the balance sheet. You know what reserve requirements are? You hear this term all the time, even for the Chinese banking system. In fact, in the Chinese banking system, they put far more attention to reserve requirements than they do in the United States. What are reserve requirements? Any clue? Go ahead. When you have a certain amount of deposits in on your liability side, okay, the bank is required to park some cash. So I guess it's quite unusual in that this requirement actually hits you on the asset side. You are parking some of your reserves with the central bank. Now that is a reserve requirement. So I think if the reserve requirements was 17, so for every $100, $17 has to be parked away with the central bank. For example, if it was 17, it's funny. Some central banks actually like to use the reserve requirement as an active policy tool. China is an example. US is not. They hardly ever touch it. I think the US, in fact, is a lot lower. It could be like 5%. It's not something that people pay a lot of attention to. They know it's there, okay? It very rarely gets changed, okay? But anyway, so in the US, also they have this requirement, but it's not used as actively. So you need to park the money with the Fed. Now, here's when it gets interesting. So you got all these banks, and in the middle is the Fed, and they all have to park the reserve requirements with the Fed. And some of them, so on any given day, some banks will have more than needed with the Fed, and some banks may not have enough. So those who have more money in their reserve account can lend to those who do not have enough, like Citibank can lend to JP Morgan. Okay, now the rate at which you are lending to each other to fulfill the reserve requirement, ladies and gentlemen, that is called the Fed funds. Okay? And if you look carefully at the newspaper, there's something called the Fed funds target. And there's something called, there's the actual Fed funds, okay? They don't say that, but Fed funds, I'll put it in brackets, actual, okay? Now, so when they have a meeting, when they have a central bank meeting, after they come out, they say, oh, we are increasing the Fed funds. What they really mean is we are increasing the target. The target now is 1.5. Okay, 1.5% per annum. Now this is an overnight rate, by the way, so it rolls over one day at a time. The target is 1.5%. Now, as to the actual Fed fund, that depends, because if you are JP Morgan, you are Citibank, okay? What you guys do with each other is not my business. If I understand, I can't say you, hey, you lend to him, okay? 1.5. No, I don't do that, okay? You lend to him at whatever rate you want. But the rate at which you lend to him, to fulfill the reserve requirement, that is known as the Fed fund. So I have a target, and the target is what they announce every there's no change to the target. Now, so the actual rate and the target rate can be different, but normally they're quite close. So I already said to you, I don't ask you, okay, you lend to him, you lend to her. I don't do that, right? So how do they control? How do they try to get the Fed funds to be close to the target? How do they do that? Now, if you understand that part, you basically understand intuitively how monetary policy, how it works. And the way they try to control that is via the government bond repo market. Okay. Now, first of all, what is that? Now so this is related to last time. Okay. We talked about repo. Now, what's a government bond repo? So let's say A lends money to B. So A lends 100 million, but in return, B will sell, but it's sell in quotes. You're not really selling, okay? B will sell treasuries. And then the next day, and I really mean 24 hours later, okay? A will buy it back. So maybe 100 and well, let's say 101. You do that for one day, and if you pay 1 basis point, that really means your annualized interest rate is 3.65, doesn't it? For example, okay? Now, don't worry about that for a moment. Okay, so this is a very, very simple US Treasury-based repo transaction. Now, I would say two things on this. Number one, when A is lending money to B like this, which is after all what they're doing, they're lending money and getting treasuries, okay? But there is an obligation for B to pay back. Okay? You say you are buying treasuries, but effectively you are just paying back and getting your bond back. So when A is lending money to B like this, compared to this scenario, when A is simply lending 100 million and then getting some money back the day after, when there's no collateral of any kind. Okay, now here the interest rate I said is 3.6 is probably too high, but I'm using that because there's 1 cent in here, so it's easy to calculate. Okay, or you can make this 0.005, in which case this interest rate is somewhere around 1.82% per annum. Now I ask you, if A just simply lends money to B and there's no collateral, if you had to make a guess on the interest rate, I'm not asking you exactly where it is now, would it be higher than 1.82, equal to 1.82, or lower than 1.82? Higher, of course it's higher, thank you, okay? It has to be high, it doesn't matter where, okay? It has to be higher because now I don't have anything in my hand, okay? Now, this is how central banks try to influence monetary policy. Now, this could be the Fed funds. This is like the Treasury repo market. The Treasury repo market rate is always acting as kind of a floor on the Fed funds. Because if you lend money to somebody and they're happy to give you treasuries and you can still get 182, then when you lend money to them with no collateral, there's just no way you can lend it to them. There's no way you will lend it to them at a rate lower than 1.82. You see what I'm saying? So the repo market is kind of acting, the word I'm looking for is floor, as a floor, okay? Now this is the first observation I want to make. The second observation is that central banks are very active, very, very active in the bond repo market. So they have a lot of bonds, they have a lot of cash as well, okay? So sometimes they sell bonds, take the cash out. Sometimes they put the cash to the market, buy bonds. They have an enormous amount of influence. The way they try to influence the Fed funds is by influencing the repo rate. So you hear in the news quite often, oh, they talk about, oh, the 7-day repo rate. You hear that a lot, the 7-day repo rate. That's what it is, ladies and gentlemen, okay? So this is how a central bank tries to influence monetary policy by A, setting a target, and B, using the repo market, using the government bond repo market to push the Fed funds close to the target. Okay, so there are a lot of concepts floating around. Now, when you start making changes to the reserve requirements, or when you are making changes and then you impose the excess reserve rate, you are, first of all, you are mostly hitting banks on the top right-hand corner of the balance sheet, which in itself would have the net impact of reducing the amount of liquidity in the market, and the excess reserve rate would do that too. Okay, but that isn't really what I was focusing on. My focus was what this actually is, which is something you need to park with a central bank. And from that point, I started talking about when one bank does not have enough and another bank has more, then these two banks can lend to each other. And the rate they actually lend to each other is called the Fed funds rate. And there is a Fed funds target. Now, the Fed funds is not always on target. Sometimes it can be substantially higher. Okay? But the way central banks try to influence the actual Fed funds so that it's close to their target is via the government bond repo market. So that one they have substantial influence. Okay. Everyone is okay with that? So I hope that's useful. I think it will be. Now, I want to just quickly go back to one thing, just by way of announcement. So you know how Ryan is fond of using or making longhand lecture notes. So we started from lecture 2. Lecture 1, the projector was not working. So I've actually scanned up all of these and I will put them online. So you will have all of these. Anything he's written, I will try to scan it up. I haven't done it for last night, but I have done it for lecture 2, and I have done it for lecture 3. This was last week. Okay. Last night I haven't done it yet. Okay. Now I want to just go back and I will not go through all of the quizzes because some of them are it's just bookwork. So he's just really testing whether you are paying attention in class, and you can find the answers actually in his notes. Okay. What I do want to go back on is and I promised you last time I would do this. Now there's a trade here which is quite interesting, and we already went over just exactly what is an asset swap, which is if you are an investor and you bought an asset and it's giving you some kind of payoff. It doesn't matter what it is, fixed rate, floating rate, local currency, foreign currency, and you don't like that, but you like the credit, so you swap away the payoff that you don't like and you get the one that you actually do want. Okay? Now that's a classic asset swap. It just means you take the credit risk of this guy without getting the payoff that comes with it. So you swap that part. Okay. Now, so that's an asset swap. That's a very, very simple asset swap, which is the derivative. And as we have said to you many, many times, and we will continue to say this, the key consideration when you are doing a swap with someone or any kind of long-dated derivative is that on day one, the mark-to-market might be zero, but as time goes by, it's going to fluctuate. And that makes people very nervous. Okay? When you join the banking world, you're going to find that this is essentially a key obsession of risk managers. We have thousands of clients, and some of them are losing money because they have a negative mark-to-market. Can they actually pay? Okay? So mark-to-market actually is very important. Now, so here, it's a bit messed up. So you have an asset swap with a bit of a difference. Okay, now what is the difference? So first of all, in this asset swap, the client is not actually buying the asset directly, but that doesn't matter. Okay, the client is trading through an SPV, so it's already packaged up and delivered to you directly. But apart from that, the other interesting thing is this is not a simple asset swap. Okay, now in this asset swap, which is a US dollar, Australian dollar cross currency asset swap, now normally an asset swap like this will come with an enormous amount of mark-to-market risk, especially when there are different currencies involved. Okay, now in this case something quite interesting actually happens. What is that? This bullet point. Okay, now look at this. So upon a credit event on pre-agreed reference entity, in this case, the reference entity is actually the entity that you are taking the risk on, Telecom Australia. Okay, the swap terminates at zero mark-to-market. So basically the swap is finished and there are no more cash flows. Okay, are you guys okay with that? First of all, do you understand what that means? I hope you will come to appreciate this structure because this is at the heart of what your instructor actually is doing. Ryan, that is. Right? If you want to work for him, you certainly should understand this. Right? Is everyone okay with that? What would happen normally if this was just a plain vanilla asset swap is that if this company goes bankrupt, there would still be a mark-to-market gain or loss here. I don't know how much, $17 million, let's say, okay? So one party will have to pay the other. If the bank has to pay the SPV, then that means the client has a $17 million gain. But if the SPV has to pay the bank, there would be a 17 million loss. Okay. What this is saying is that when there is a credit event on the underlying entity, let's forget about the mark-to-market, whatever it might be, okay? Just forget about this swap. So no one needs to pay anyone else, and you just say goodbye to each other. And if the vanilla asset swap can pay the client LIBOR plus 110, if they agree to this condition, this so-called extinguisher swap, they would actually pay the client more. They pay them 25 basis point more. Can you see that? LIBOR plus 135. Okay. So if the client is happy to take on this feature where the swap will simply be quietly terminated, they get another 25% pickup. Are you okay with that? Do you know what I'm saying? Or not? You need to understand, because the next question is harder. The next question is, why does the client get that extra 25 basis points? But do you understand what I'm saying now? Everyone is okay with that? Sure. Take a minute to think about it. Lam, are you okay with that? If I was a customer, imagine I'm the client, you are SocGen, I ask you to explain to me what's going on here. How would you answer that question? We have lost the screens. No, we got the screens back. Are you aware that some of our very distinguished alumni, I need is an extinguished alumni, distinguished alumni, are working for Ryan? Did you know that? I think they're still there, right? So I don't know if he's going to hire more people, but if you are interested to work in this area, and in the next few weeks, the material is going to become absolutely fascinating, I can promise you, because last year, at the end of the course, I had students coming up to me and saying, Sam, I love this material, I want to work in this area, okay? The question was, what should I do? Yeah, but leaving that aside, okay, so if you want to work either with him or at least in this area, maybe not in this bank, okay, this is something that you should try to pay attention to, okay? So do you all understand what I was just saying to you here? That, do you understand what I meant when I said a simple plain vanilla asset swap might pay you LIBOR plus 110, whereas if you add this extinguishing feature to it. Actually, the bank or the swap provider over here is willing to pay an extra 25 basis points. Is everyone okay with that? This is just interpreting the commercial terms. Everyone is okay with that or not? Seeing you're not okay, you're shaking your head, you're not okay. All right, so some people, now, okay, let me because this little case actually explains a lot about not only counterparty risk and mark-to-market, but the nature of correlation and how risk managers actually think, okay? So here's Telstra, and they pay some kind of coupon, doesn't matter what it is, okay? Don't worry about what it is right now, but we know it's in Australian dollars. And then here's the investor. The investor doesn't want this. The investor wants to swap that away and get a US dollar return, US dollar LIBOR, 3 months. Now, if this was just a plain vanilla swap, they will get LIBOR plus 110 only, okay? This is the result of just a plain vanilla asset swap. What we are now saying is, so we say to the investor, how about, so here's the investor, same situation. So here's Telstra. So here's the coupon. By the way, at the end, they also have to pay principal in Aussie dollars, okay? If we say to the investor, okay, well, look, we know this is the asset swap. This is the coupon, and this is the principal. I'm now including the principal. And so normally, in a plain vanilla asset swap, we only pay 110. And we also pay principal in US dollars. Now, if the bank providing the swap, if they say to the investor, okay, in the event that Telstra goes bankrupt, if they do, okay, we would like to also walk away from this asset swap. Even though there should be some mark to market, but let's just say we will just set it to 0 and we walk away, okay? If you are happy to do that, then I will pay you LIBOR plus 135. So I pay you another 25 basis points extra. Are you with me there? Everyone is okay now? So I pay you more if in the event that there's a blow up with Telecom Australia, okay, we don't worry about mark to market. I don't pay you, you don't pay me. Whatever the mark to market might actually be at that point, we just ignore it, and we just terminate the swap, and there will not be any exchange anymore. So I don't pay you the dollar principal, and you don't pay me the Australian principal either. Okay? Everyone is okay with that? Now, here comes the question. Where does that 25 basis point come from? It's real money. If you do a swap for $100 million, every year is 250K. It's not trivial. Where does it come from? In other words, why would the bank be happy to pay that amount of money in order to have the mark-to-market set to zero if there ever is a credit event with Telstra? That's more my question, okay? Now, the reason I say this is, this goes to the heart of how risk managers, how they think, is you think of it like this, okay? Think of it like this. If Telstra goes bankrupt, if it does, okay, it must be some kind of disaster, because Telstra is like China Telecom, okay? They are huge. Then what is likely to happen to the Australian dollar? Thank you. It most likely, because something terrible has happened to Australia, such that the key telecom company has gone bankrupt. It must be something catastrophic, okay? So if this was to happen, the Aussie dollar will probably go down too, okay? That means if you were to do an asset swap, now look at the swap bank over here. They are receiving Australian dollars and paying US. In other words, for the swap bank, they are long Aussie and they are short dollars. That's what that means, because they are at some point in the future receiving Australian dollars, okay? So they are long Aussie and short US. Now you tell me, if Telstra goes down, Australian dollar goes down, the swap bank has a position like that, what's the mark-to-market going to be like? It's going to be extremely negative. In other words, if this really was to happen, if Telstra goes bankrupt, there is almost no doubt that the swap bank will lose money because their mark-to-market will be less than zero. Okay? So what you are doing as an investor is you say to the swap bank, oh, all right, well, look, if Telstra goes bankrupt, we don't worry about the mark-to-market, which is just another way of saying you don't have to pay me the money that you lose. Okay? So for that reason, the swap bank is happy to pay them that extra, okay? Because in the end, what's happening? In the end, by paying that little bit extra, it allows the swap bank to get rid of that risk, however small it might be. The risk of what? The risk of this asset swap going seriously wrong. Seriously wrong because something terrible has happened to Australia. Now, you might think, yeah, that won't happen. That's not the point, okay? They have now managed to get rid of this risk. And for that, they're happy to pay the extra. Okay? Is everyone okay with that? Now, this is all related to bank capital as well. And what I mean by that is when you are doing a transaction like this, which is long dated, and cross currency, you actually need a lot of capital to back it up. That is a regulatory requirement. So if you don't have a lot of capital, they don't allow you to do a trade like that. Okay, now, why do they want you to have lots of capital to back it up? It is for the simple reason that if things start to go wrong, they want you to have the money to pay for it. Okay? The thing is, with this transaction, when you do this swap, you already got rid of your worst case, which is Telstra going bankrupt, and then this swap actually ending up hurting you. You already got rid of that scenario. You had an agreement with a client, okay? So it is likely that the capital requirement of a trade like that would be a lot less. So although you pay 25 basis points here, you're going to save a lot of money in your capital requirement. That's how they do their calculations. Okay? I wanted to share that with you because there is a lot you can learn from a case like this. Okay? You can read all the other slides if you want. This is just describing the different scenarios that can take place when there is a credit event, when there is not, and whether the swap mark-to-market is positive or negative, right? All right. Okay, I think I've said enough on that. I don't know if he's going to test you in the final. He could just ask you to explain regarding that transaction, you know. First of all, do you understand it? Number one. Number two, what is the point? What is the point for the swap bank? What is the point for the client? For the client, by the way, clearly, they are happy to give up that mark-to-market, and then in exchange they get 25 basis points. The number one reason must be they simply don't think Telstra would go bankrupt. Okay, they just think there's like 0.00001% of that happening. Let's say. Okay. So this is the psychology behind it. Okay. Now, what happened to this document? What happened to it? Okay, so today we actually talked quite a lot about other things, about where we are, what point we are possibly in the current economic cycle. We talked about overnight index swaps, Fed funds, how are Fed funds related to the OIS. Well, Fed funds actually kind of is the OIS. How is OIS related to LIBOR? OIS is kind of like the short end. So you got a swap curve, and you can look it up anywhere. So it goes all the way out to 30 years. And then there is 10 years. And then there's 2 years. Now, actually, the 3-month point on the swap curve is where you should find the LIBOR rate. In other words, the swap curve, in essence, is a series of interest rates at which high-quality banks are willing to lend to each other, whether it's for 30 years, 3 years, or 3 months. Okay, it is the rate at which, at least the concept is, it is the rate at which Citibank is happy to lend to JP Morgan, or when HSBC is happy to lend to Standard Chartered, and so on. Okay, now you can really go down to the extreme and go here at the 1 day, for 1 day. Okay, that would be, that's actually, there's a rate called overnight LIBOR, which is not Fed funds. Okay, Fed funds specifically refers to the lending and the borrowing between banks for reserve requirements. Overnight LIBOR would just be one bank lending to another, but on an overnight basis, not for reserve requirement. But the two rates actually are very closely related, as you can imagine. Okay, so the Fed funds or overnight LIBOR is right at the tip here. Okay. How is Fed funds related to the repo market? Well, we spent a lot of time explaining that. So I hope by now you get all of these. You should now be able to answer all these questions because we discussed all of them today. Okay. Do you understand what Fed funds? Bye. There's a Fed funds target. Okay. I was going to talk about bonds. I think I'll leave that till next time. Does anyone want to ask me any questions? Normally, no one puts their hand up, and then when we finish, people come up to me and ask me questions. Yes. This one. Now, first of all, what's LIBOR? LIBOR is just when two banks are borrowing or lending to each other, and they pay a rate, and if it's for 3 months, then you use the 3-month LIBOR rate. If it's 1 month, you use a 1-month LIBOR rate. If it's for 1 week, you use a 1-week LIBOR. If it's for 1 day, there is a fixing called the overnight LIBOR. Overnight LIBOR, okay? OIS is when they are still doing a swap, okay? And the swap could be 10 years. So the OIS actually, well, let's just overnight index swap. Okay. Now this one, first of all, it's a swap. Okay. So for a plain vanilla swap, let's say for 10 years, so A pays B 3% for 10 years, and B pays A LIBOR 3 months for 10 years. Now that's a very simple, boring interest rate swap. So all I'm saying is, with an overnight index swap, you don't use the 3 month, you don't use the 1 month, you don't even use the 1 week. You use a 1 day rate. Okay. You use the daily fixing. So there is an overnight rate, which is very closely related to the daily Fed funds. The Fed funds can change from one day to another, okay, and that's what it's based on. So that means if you do a 10-year OIS, B is going to pay A, well, assuming there are 220 trading days per year, okay, 220 trading days per year. B is going to make a payment to A 2,200 times because it's based on a daily rate. Okay? No, I know. No. Okay, now if you want to use 30, first of all, whether it's 30 days or 30 years, okay, the issue is that it's more than 1 day and you have to roll over. Okay, now, no. If you actually want to borrow money, on an overnight basis, then there is a risk that the next day you can't borrow. That I agree with. Okay. Now, if you do an OIS, which after all stands for overnight index swap, okay, you can't do an overnight index swap for 1 day. There's nothing to swap. Okay, so it has to be a longer period. Now, you know what swap is called in Chinese, right? 掉期, 掉期, which one? 期, the second term. Okay. Now, I think that is a very, yeah, my pronunciation is funny, right? I think that's a very elegant translation. 期. What kind of 期 can you have? You can have 长期, 短期. And when you are swapping, what are you swapping? You are swapping precisely that. You are swapping the long term for the short term. Now, your example of a 30-day OIS, what would that look like? That would be, I pay you a rate, one rate, 2% annualized, okay, for 30 days. You pay me whatever is the overnight rate, and you do that 30 times. That's all it is. Okay, so do not think the OIS is complicated. It's not. Okay, it's just taking the swap to a kind of microscopic level. I don't know exactly what Ryan was referring to. If you are borrowing money on a daily basis, yes, there is a chance that you can't roll over. I mean, Lehman Brothers was exactly that. But when you are doing a swap, so if it's a 30-day OIS, all it means is, I pay you every day. So this one would be 2% times 30 divided by 360. But this one would be whatever that rate is. It's just 1 day. And then you just multiply that. You don't multiply, but you accumulate it 1 day at a time. Okay? The reason the OIS or the Fed funds, or the repo rate may be more relevant. The reason these are significant is because they are very, very close to something which is practically risk-free. Certainly the repo rate is, okay? Because it's so short, it's only 1 day, first of all. And what's more, they are giving you government bonds. So the risk of default is very, very, so this is, of all the interest rates out there, the government bond repo rate is probably the safest one, okay? And of course, so that is why I say this is a floor. And then the Fed funds, it reacts to whether this floor is rising or sinking. And it drives how banks actually treat each other in their borrowing or lending transaction. Yeah. No. Every single day, every day, okay, there is an overnight rate, there's a 1 week rate, there's a 1 month, there's 3 months. We are comparing them on a cross-sectional basis. So let's say yesterday was April 19 or April 20. So you are looking at the overnight rate here, and you are comparing it with the 3-month rate here. Now there's a 6-month, 9 months, 12 months, then there's a 1 year, 2 year. Okay, I mean, you're basically looking at the yield curve. I'll show you. This is the US Treasury, but you can do the same thing for the swap market, okay? This is a term structure of US Treasury. They don't have the overnight because this is not the interbank market. This is the government bond market. So they don't bother to show the overnight. But it is just comparing one number somewhere with another number on the same date. I don't know if I've answered your question. Correct. Yeah. It's a reflection of, it's a measurement of the difference between very, very short-term interbank borrowing and slightly longer. So comparing 1 day with 3 months. Okay. So when markets are very, very nervous, they are nervous overnight too, but they are, the longer it is, the more nervous they get. Thank you for that question.
You got that, yeah. You got the scan. Yeah. The difference is the OIS, that daily rate for the OIS is based on Fed funds. It's not based on overnight market. It's interesting, isn't it? So now you know how central banks work. Isn't that good? Okay, so when you go home, you get on the train over there, right? You get in the train, you ask yourself, oh, I wonder how many people on this carriage knows how central bank monetary policies are adopted. Right? What do you think? You might be the only one.
All right, I'm going to let you go. And thank you for your attention. And I wish you a very, very nice weekend.